think Nick will be my favorite member in Congress when he's elected. We've gotten to know each other the last couple months, and he's ready to put America first. He's ready to fight for faith, for family, and for freedom. And you can bet that when we re-elect President Trump in 23 days, we're going to send Nick to Washington, and with God's help, the best is yet to come.
Yes.
I have no doubt. So with that, I'm honored to be here in Culpeper, and introduce a great American, Mr. Nick Freitas, hometown hero.
Thank you guys so much for being here. Everyone, let's give a round of applause for John Payne. You just heard John's schedule. I'm willing to bet John is still trying to fight the jet lag right now because he's been all over the country right now advocating for candidates, advocating for the president, for the vice president, and he does an incredible job of articulating what it is that we care about. So thank you very much, John, you and your family. I also, listen, when businesses put themselves out there to actually host something for Republicans, there's a price to be paid for that. All right, Democrats do this all the time because they're never afraid of a Republican mob throwing a brick through their window. All right, but businesses that are actually willing to support Republicans, when they're willing to do that, it's our job to also go back in that community and support them. So thank you very much for that. And to the Culpeper Committee, you guys have set records on so many things that you're probably not even aware of right now because you guys are so in the fight at this point. But when you guys, when we're on November 4th and we get a time to all come up for air and actually take a look, I want you to know something. I've already talked to Marshall. We're going to Rich Anderson and we're actually talking about how the RPV can replicate what Culpeper is doing all across the Commonwealth. So thank you. I'm going to take some questions at the end because I know people have some questions on, hey, how do we respond to this? When I'm talking to somebody, when I'm talking to my neighbor, when I'm talking to my coworker, what do I say? But I want to go over a couple of points here real quick because I've had a lot of opportunity to converse with the press lately. And that is always just such a reasonable, docile conversation back and forth. Especially when the president and the first lady contracted COVID. You can bet that the only thing the press wanted to talk to me about was trying to spin this narrative of how irresponsible the president was in his response to COVID and whatnot. And I'm sitting with this one reporter, and he's asking me, he's like, well, don't you agree, right? That's how they set out. They've already established what the premise is, and now they're just trying to determine whether or not you agree. Well, don't you agree that the president didn't do enough here and the president did enough? I said, well, wait a second. I said, you do realize that we're a federated republic, right? We have this thing called the Constitution, lays out responsibilities, the federal government, the state government, local governments, etc. I said, here's my question. I said, when you look at everything the federal government did, because if you remember what the initial argument was, is we got to flatten the curve. We can't overwhelm the medical system because they didn't think this president would be able to do that. And then what did he do? He immediately went into action. We had travel bans from countries that were hotspots, and he deployed federal resources all over the country to hotspots. And as a result, we flattened the curve and we didn't overwhelm our medical system. He did that. Does he get any credit for it? Absolutely not. And he never will from this press because they are so in the bag, wholly owned subsidiary of the DNC at this point, that they can't even acknowledge it. And so I started to hammer back on the reporter a little bit. I'm like, wait a second, didn't you hear what Dr. Fauci just said? Well, what's that? Oh, okay, you're not listening to Dr. Fauci now that he's actually saying that this administration did pretty much everything they could and you can't imagine anyone have done better. No, they didn't want to read that part. But Governor Cuomo's coming out with a book on how well he handled COVID. I mean, maybe it's a coloring book. I don't know. But it's certainly not something that any other governor should ever read unless they want to know, hey, this is what you really should not do in the midst of a pandemic. But we shouldn't be surprised. Because just like Abigail Spanberger, whenever they talk about wanting to solve problems, they always have the same solution: more government power. And it always comes at the expense of our liberty, but not just our liberty. Because it comes at the expense of our liberty, it comes at the expense of our creativity, our innovation, our adaptability. If you wanted to see who was really responding to COVID well, it sure as heck wasn't Governor Northam. But you saw private businesses, you saw private individuals, you saw private groups all around this community that were immediately stepping up and filling needs where they needed to be met. And that's been true since the founding of this country. You go back to Alexis de Tocqueville in the 1830s talking about there's something special and unique about America because in Europe, everyone sits around waiting for the government to show up in order to solve problems. In America, they come together as free people and they solve them themselves. And I had the press, because the press loves to ask this question, because they're looking at the 7th district, they know it's a tight race, it's within about 1 point right now between myself and Spanberger, and they're saying, well, gosh, you know, it must be hard running with President Trump. No. Why? I'm like, because he has a record to run on. I said, when you look at what he's actually accomplished, if any Republican president had accomplished half of what he did in the same amount of time, I would be blown away. I mean, if he would have just sat down and took the next year off and golfed after signing the regulatory reform and the tax reform, I would have said, well, done more than any Republican since Reagan. But he didn't stop there. He kept fighting, and by the way, he did it with the most hostile press corps, the most hostile Congress I think we've ever seen in modern history. They pulled out all the stops. I loved it when they used Abigail Spanberger. Oh, by the way, she's the moderate that currently represents the district, right? She's the nonpartisan moderate that represents the district. They used Abigail Spanberger to justify impeachment. And the reason why they used it is because she had marketed herself as a moderate and then said, well, as a former case officer within the CIA, I can say that based off of the intelligence I've read, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, wait a second. I did a little work in intel. I mean, I did it in combat zones, so maybe it was a little different from her experience, but when I did intel, I knew this. If I went to my commanding officer and I said, hey, we should overthrow a freely elected leader based off of nothing but hearsay evidence and not a single criminal act, what do you think? I'd have lost my job. You know, but that's exactly what she did. And it's up to us to make sure she doesn't get away with it.
That's right. That's right.
If you go back to the Trump record, and what did we see? We saw record unemployment across all demographics. Was that because we handed out a bunch of government subsidies and we started up a bunch of new government programs? No, it was because we made it easier to do business here in the United States. We had more businesses coming back to the United States. We had more businesses expanding. We had more businesses providing the sort of opportunities that make everyone's lives better. But they don't like that sort of economic growth because they don't get to control it. And what John said is absolutely true. They're not interested in freedom. They're not interested in property rights. They're not interested in free markets. What they're interested in is control. Given all their talk about tolerance, coexistence, unity, no, what they want is obedience. And I've said it once, I know you guys have heard me say it a number of times, and I'm going to repeat it because it bears repeating. They are not a liberal party. They're an authoritarian party. And COVID has highlighted that like nothing else. Do what we say or we'll shut down your business. Do what we say or we'll shut down your church. Do what we say or we'll pack the court. Do what we say or we'll impeach you. Do what we say or we'll lock you up. Unless you want to burn Richmond to the ground. Then you can run free for multiple days. The same governor that had to sit there and wait while that city was on fire, well, you had Antifa protesters blocking a fire truck trying to get to a burning building to save a trapped child, waited 2 days to call a state of emergency. Now, it's not because he doesn't know how to call a state of emergency, because when we went down there to protest for our Second Amendment rights, he called it a state of emergency 2 days prior. You want to know what the difference was? Is that when we all went down there, we peacefully protested, nobody was arrested, nobody broke anything, we picked up our trash when we left, and we made an impact.
Cleaned it up.
But that's not good enough for them. This is about control. And if they can't get it through coercion, then they'll certainly try to spread it through fear. And if you get the feeling right now that you are subtly being threatened, that if you don't vote the way they want on November 3rd, the mob will continue to run rampant, it's because that's what they mean. That's what they mean. And I look at that, and as an American, like, if that's really what you want, that's not what we want, but bring it. Nobody is going to threaten, coerce, or intimidate the American people into their political agenda. And what they hate the most about anybody that's willing to stand up and actually defend what it is we believe, whether it's President Trump, whether it's Vice President Pence, is because deep down they know they have sold the American people a lie. They have sold it in our schools, they have sold it in the arts and entertainment industry, they have sold it in our universities, they have sold it on the media. And the best way to fight a lie is with the truth. And the truth is sometimes, and I'm holding myself accountable here, sometimes we need to be reminded of who we are. And you look at the Virginia flag, we're not the one on the ground. And that is our subtle way as Virginians of telling people, don't do tyrant stuff. And now more than ever, we need to stand up, because I will tell you this, I have no use for a silent majority, and neither does the country. I found it interesting that when you talk to a Republican in a heavy Democrat area, they're almost scared to tell you they're a Republican. Right? They're walking around like they're a Christian during Nero's time, except the Christian during Nero's time were actually bold. You see Democrats in Republican areas, they're not afraid. They're not afraid to talk about what they believe. Should there be any curiosity on why philosophically our kids and younger people are actually starting to buy into what they're selling? If we look afraid to talk about what we believe, but they're not? If they're bold and we're fearful? So that ends. That ends. Because what we believe is not only, it's not just that it achieves better results, it is noble, and it is true, and it is just. Because we don't see people as accidents of evolution. We see people as beautifully and wonderfully created in the image of God.
Amen.
That's why when people in Democrat-controlled areas are sitting there, hunkered down, wondering, what do we do? You go out to rural areas and you see when we face a disaster, when we face a pandemic, when we face problems, we come out of our homes, go over to our neighbor and say, how can we help? What do you need? Because we know that community is not what government tells us as. Community is us. It's free people working together in order to make our lives better, our family lives better, and our communities' lives better. And they want to trade that for the promise that if we just hand over more of our money, more of our freedom to them, they'll take care of us. I have been all over the world and I have seen what their philosophy does to people. And the worst part about it is not the poverty, it's not the sickness, it's not even the oppression. It's when people buy into it that they are nothing more than whatever some political elite tells them they are. And that has never been us, and it is never going to be us. So, for these next few weeks, that's really what we need. They need to see everybody that's undecided right now, everybody that's a little bit concerned because of the cocktail party they might attend. Oh, what will my neighbor think? What is the media saying? Oh, he's behind in the polls. Yeah, we've heard all this before. We heard it all before, right before they said the next president of the United States, Donald J. Trump. So when you go forward, display confidence. Because we should be confident in what we believe. Look how well it has worked for generations. Look how many people it's lifted up out of poverty. You want the truest test that what we believe in works and what they believe in fails? Go look at what people do that have to live under Democrat policies in other countries. They're trying to come here. I don't know of anybody in West Germany that was trying to get under the wall to make it into the socialist utopia of Eastern Germany. I don't know of anybody that's going down to the south of Florida right now and making a makeshift raft so they can get down to Cuba because they've got free health care. And I have good friends and people that have helped our campaign that know what it's like to grow up in Venezuela and know what the blessing of freedom is in this country. And so we're doing this not just for our people right now. We're doing this because there are people dealing with oppression all over the country. Venezuela, Hong Kong. In Hong Kong, they are waving the American flag at the same time the Democrats are denigrating in this country. And it's time for us to step up and be the America that they have read about, that they have heard about, and that they have dreamed about. So thank you for being bold. Thank you for being completely unapologetic about what it is that we believe. Because that's what attracts people to what we're doing, to what we're fighting for. It's because the people in this room understand that we're not just going to be the beneficiaries of freedom. We understand the responsibilities of it. It's because we fully understand that that same flag that dragged the coffins of men and women that never came home, that we owe them. And when history records what our generation, what we did at this moment, it's going to record that despite everything that was thrown at us, we stood up and demonstrated that we were worthy of everyone that came before us. Amen. Now, I know some people got some questions for me about kind of the status of the campaign, where we're at right now, and I want to be able to get some of those because, again, it's part of my job to equip you with what we're seeing through the campaign. The biggest thing I'll tell you right now is let's do a quick matchup between 2018 and 2020 and where we're at right now. So in 2016, Brat won this district with 57% of the vote. In 2018, he lost it by less than 2%. What happened? Democrats showed up in record numbers for a midterm, and Republicans showed up in standard numbers for a midterm. In the quarter last year, in 2018, Abigail Spanberger raised $3.6 million. It was the most anybody had ever raised as a congressional candidate in Virginia. The most a Republican had ever raised in Virginia was $1.5 million. Dave Brat raised $900,000 at the same time she raised $3.6. Well, I'm here to tell you this time around, we raised close to $1 million more than Dave Brat, and she raised $1 million less than what she did in 2018. In 2018, Trump wasn't on the ballot, so we had a lot of people in the Republican camp that stayed home because they thought we had won because we got President Trump elected. But we found out real quick that if you elect a good president but you don't elect a good Congress to go up there and support him, then we have Republicans that will not only not fast roll the president's agenda, they end up just slow rolling the Democrat agenda. Nobody's making that mistake again. We have a lot more people too in those suburban areas because we always talk about those suburban areas. Why are we losing them? Well, I'll tell you right now, there's a lot of people living in suburban areas, living over there in Chesterfield and Henrico that are looking over into Richmond and seeing what their future could look like if Democrats take control next year, and it is changing their minds. Last time, Abigail Spanberger was she knocked well over 100,000 doors. They were out there and they had a robust ground game. This year, 0. Because when you've convinced everybody that COVID's going to kill them, you can't really go out and knock doors. We do have a robust ground game. We're closing in on 100,000 doors right now. We'll be close to 200,000 by the time it's over. So 0 doors to 200,000. She dropped about her and her buddies. Oh, by the way, don't you love the, I don't take corporate PAC money. Oh, okay, let's be intellectually honest. Her campaign does not directly take corporate PAC money, because that would look bad. Right. So, dating back for her days in the intelligence service, she launders the corporate PAC money through Nancy Pelosi's PAC, who then gives it to her. Right? But they spent all that money and they dropped close to $3 million so far, almost exclusively on negative attack ads on us. And I remember sitting there, because we had some of our ads up too, and we were fighting to raise the funds to get more ads up, and I remember thinking, my gosh, this is going to take a hit on us. Because we went from being down 4 in July to being down 1, and I thought to myself, we're going to be back down to down 4. $3 million got them half a point moving in the polls. That was it. And since then, another group has come out with independent modeling that shows us up by 1.
Oh.
So that's where we're at right now. That's why I say be encouraged. We're going to take this back. Because the odds that she had, the advantages that she had in 2018, it helped her win by 6,000 votes. And it still wasn't as many votes as Donald Trump had in 2016. So we're getting all those people back. They're all coming back because they know how important it is to re-elect this president. And then we've got a ground game that is matching it. And so I'm very confident about where we're at right now. We've just got to finish it out to the end. We've just got to finish it out to the end. And with that, I'll take some questions. Who's got some questions? Yes, sir.
I have a question. What were the numbers that President Trump carried the 7th district against his opponent?
He carried it by about 6.5 points in
How many votes
2016.
would you say that?
Can you repeat the question?
I'm sorry, the question was, what were the numbers that Trump carried the district by in 2016? And he carried it by about 6.5 points. And right now, he's up in the polls too. We're both up in the polls in the
That's
7th
about
district.
15,000 votes
Roughly.
that she would have to overcome, really.
Yeah, well, from what your number was, she would have to overcome another 6,000 votes on what Trump got in 2016, because you also have people that voted for Gary Johnson, McMillan. They're not really there anymore. Joe Jorgensen doesn't have the same campaign that Gary Johnson did. Evan McMillan, who's a complete and absolute disgrace and should have never, whatever. He's not there anymore, and we've got a lot of people. And look, there were a lot of people in 2016. They weren't sure if the president was actually going to make good on his promises. To be perfectly honest, I was concerned. But my gosh, he didn't just make good on them. He doubled down and accomplished. He's getting peace deals in the Middle East and the Balkans. Democrats can't get peace deals in Portland. So Abigail came out, and so we challenged Abigail to 5 debates. Now the question was, why won't Abigail debate? It's the same reason why Democrats don't want to debate across the board. Some of them now are finally climbing out of the basement and deciding to do it. She won't. She won't. Now she came out and she says, Nick Freitas is lying. We agreed to 5 debates. Let me tell you what the 5 events were that she agreed to. First of all, one of them that actually was the closest to an actual debate had already been canceled when she put out her press release saying she agreed to it. Well, that's convenient. Then there was 3 others that were basically private groups that when we asked them, will you broadcast this out to the 7th district? They said no. One of them was a teletown hall with the AARP. Immediately agreed to it. And then we find out, oh, well, it's not going to be you and Abby on the same call. You're going to go first, and Abigail's going to go 2 days later. I still did it. That's not a problem. I know where I stand. I can explain my voting record. So the closest thing we have to a debate is a forum. And again, she came out and she goes, Nick Freitas is lying. We've agreed to a debate. It's on October 20th. So we did a screenshot of the rules and said right in there, remember candidates, this is not a debate. Said, who's lying right now? Yeah. So we have the forum on October 20th that we're gonna do that will actually be broadcast out for everyone to see. But isn't it interesting that we had requested 5 debates before early voting had started because we wanted people to have a chance to actually hear both sides. She was completely silent for over 2 weeks, and then the closest thing she's actually agreed to a publicized debate is on October 20th. They don't want, what record are they going to defend? $4 trillion in new taxes? We've got businesses that survived COVID that will not survive their tax and regulatory policies. What's she going to defend? Cities on fire across the country? That the only thing they all have in common is they've been unilaterally run by Democrats for the last 50 years? What's she going to run on? The COVID policy of we need another huge lockdown? By the way, that is not based on science. If you actually want to see a scientific approach, go look at what Sweden's been doing. I don't quote Swedish policy a lot, but pretty good on this one. Right, so that's why they don't want to debate. They don't want to get up there. I mean, they don't want to have another Mike Pence and Kamala Harris. They don't want that. I think it was so funny to read what some of the Democrats were trying. I mean, I got to hand it to them. They lied big, right? They lied big. Oh, she did such a wonderful job against Mike Pence. Like, seriously? Like, are we watching the same thing here? Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Took her lunch money. Any other questions for me about the race?
Hey,
Yes.
Nick, I have a friend, I referred him to you, his name's Tim Stevenson, down in Amelia County. And down there, the question came up, he said there's some group called Emily something or other.
Emily's List.
Yeah, it's a huge thing that's giving money to her. Can you expound on that a little?
Abigail Spanberger is one of the largest recipients of abortion industry money in the country. Not in Virginia, the country. There's two groups that give to her overwhelmingly compared to other public sector employee unions and the abortion industry. And what John said is absolutely right. And I brought this up before, and it makes him really mad when I do. I get really tired of the Democratic Party lecturing us on tolerance and civil liberties, because they've been the party of slavery. They were the party fought against women's suffrage. They were the party of mass resistance. They were the party of voter suppression. They were the party of Jim Crow. They were the party of segregation. And now they're the party of abortion, because they finally found a victim that couldn't fight back. And that should all hit us very deeply. So that's what Emily's List is. And again, I had, this was another thing that you get when you're running in the 7th district. People will tell you, like, you got to be careful about the abortion issue. I'm like, I'm sorry. But there are some things that are just so fundamental that to compromise them is to lose oneself entirely.
Yes, right.
And the way I was brought up, from my mother, who was a nurse who took me on medical missionary trips, from my father, who was a homicide detective, who would leave in the middle of the night to go try to bring justice and peace to a family that had just been devastated. I was taught that you always stand up and you defend the people that can't defend themselves, even if you can't hear the screams. I find it so interesting that the Democrats are constantly wanting to tear down history, and I sometimes I want to look at them and we're like, you know what? I wonder what generations, decades from now, are going to say about you being the party of abortion on demand for any reason at taxpayer expense. I wonder what they'll say about you. And I sure hope they're honest about what it was you were actually doing. Because you were wiping out generations. But that's who Emily's List is. Yes, sir.
Yeah, this has to do with some messages that I think here in the remainder of the campaign, the middle of the voters, there's some issues that I think that keep them from, that I think that the president and perhaps yourself need to give a reason to say yes to. And that one is climate change.
Yeah.
And the other one is we have a very hard law and order message, but we don't really back that up with that we're not racist.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I would offer this, and this is for Mr. Pence as well. Your uncle did this during the debate. He mentioned fracking has created a shift to natural gas, and therefore we are leading the world in reducing greenhouse gases. Nobody knows that.
Yeah. No,
That
it's
is a way
absolutely.
to kill and give people a way to vote. My own brother out in California said, I'm not voting for Trump until he gets us back in the Paris climate.
Oh my
I'm like,
gosh.
no, you gotta be kidding. But I told him that,
Yeah.
and he said, oh, I didn't know.
Oh yeah. Let's list off a couple of countries or a couple of entities that are still in the Paris Accords and we're not. China and the EU. China has increased their carbon emissions by 100 metric tons. EU has increased it by 40 million metric tons. The United States has decreased ours by 140 million metric tons. That's because the Paris Accord is about as useful as a strongly worded note of protest from the UN.
Yeah.
Which is to say it accomplishes nothing. The question is how do we actually, so I love this question. I was asked this once in a debate about climate change. And I once said, I said, well, what do you mean by climate change? I said, I think the climate changes, I mean, in Virginia, about 12 times a day, depending on the season.
Yes.
The question that you're asking is what sort of effect does man-made climate change have on it? Well, look, are we debating whether or not people have an impact on our environment? No, we all agree that people have an impact on our environment. It can be a good impact, it can be a bad impact. The question is to what degree and what sort of public policy do we need to effectively address it? And here's the point that I always like to bring up. I'd love to bring this part up. Like, okay, so let me get this straight. The liberal solution to climate change is more central planning of the economy and the erosion of property rights in favor of government power. Okay, well, let's see, has this ever been tried before? Turns out it has. China, India, the former USSR, Cuba, Venezuela, Angola, I mean, the list goes on. But those countries all had centrally planned economies, and they eroded property rights. And none of them have an environmental record you'd actually want to replicate. So what does actually work? Well, the first thing is property rights. When people can actually sue a company for polluting their environment, it not only makes sure that they get justice with respect to what happened to them, but it actually encourages companies to come up with new creative and innovative ways to provide products and services. But when the government tries to take it over, and there was a perfect example of this with the catalytic converter, right? There was a bunch of lobbyists that the catalytic converter is going to make our environment safer, it's going to reduce smog, and so all cars sold in the United States have to have a catalytic converter. And what it led to was other companies that had developed superior technology literally had to rip out the superior technology and put catalytic converters in the cars in order to justify. Why? Because somebody had a better lobbyist. And we're seeing this all over the place too with solar panels. Look, I got nothing against solar, I got nothing against wind. But let's be intellectually honest about what this actually does. If you really want greater, or if you want more affordable energy, at the same time that you want to actually help the environment, then things like fracking, things like nuclear power, these are things that actually achieve that. But here's the important thing to understand. Their goal is not about healing the earth. Because if you look at the sort of economic policies they're suggesting, if you look at the sort of public policies they're suggesting, they were suggesting pretty much the same thing 30 years ago. But then they were suggesting as, well, this will be good for you economically. And it failed abysmally. And so now they're back with the same strategy, the same policies, but different justification. And it's the same sort of strategy that we've seen before, right? Do what we say or you want the earth to die. Let us take over healthcare or you want other people to die. Do what we want. That's always the argument. It's either our way or you want people to die. It's our way or you're a racist and a bigot. And the problem is we've got to fight back against that with our own solutions. And yeah, fracking, nuclear power, and then allowing innovation within the marketplace. If you really want to destroy green technology, make it completely dependent on government subsidies. Because they'll stop doing research and development, they'll stop trying to find effective ways to make it actually work within the marketplace, and they'll just do whatever it takes to get the latest government subsidy. Happens every single time. And then one other thing I'll address as part of this, so it was climate change and then...
Just law and order.
Oh, law and order. Hey, does anyone want to take a quick swing at which president passed the most comprehensive criminal justice reform in a generation? It was Donald Trump. It wasn't Barack Obama. It wasn't Bill Clinton. It was Donald Trump. But does he get any credit for it in the press? Absolutely not. Because we do believe in law and order, but as a society, we also believe in the ability of people to have second chances. But they have to pay their debt, not just to society, they have to pay their debt to their victims. They talk about criminal justice reform. One of the things that they always leave out in their plans is what about the victims? What about the victim's family? What about their justice? And we can fight for both. They insist on only fighting for one. Which is why Abigail Spanberger sat there and campaigned for a bunch of members of the House of Delegates that just went in during the COVID package, voted to make it easier, or voted to actually create a process where people convicted of child pornography can get out of jail early. That's their version of criminal justice reform. All right, listen, I know I'm taking up a lot of time. I've got to stop here, but again, I just cannot thank you enough for all the time, all the effort that you put into this. We've got a few more weeks. This election is probably going to be decided within a few points, both statewide for Daniel Gate, for the president, and right here in the 7th District. But if we win this back, this puts something in play. It doesn't end there. It starts there. You've heard me say this before. We're drawing a line in the sand, not to show them how much farther they can go. It's to show them where we're starting. That's what this is all about for the next 3 weeks. So thank you very much for everything that you've done, everything that you will do. And thank you very much for John.